Now, back in the spring, the three of us, Rose, Steve, and I, pulled together to try to put together information about the protections and benefits that would be available to TASSC survivors in response to some of the economic and health devastation and damage that resulted from the pandemic. And there's a good bit that we, fortunately, a good bit that we can talk about tonight, because there have been a number of legislative initiatives, regulations, and programs that have been put in place in the meantime to assist folks who have been affected by the pandemic. Now, I and probably most of us expected that all of these measures would be needed for a few months. There'd be a lockdown, there would be a phase back into normal life, and then life would get back to normal within a few months. But here we are 10 months later, and that's far from true. Now there's hope in the future because we finally have vaccines being distributed. But for the next few months, we still have to struggle through both the health and the economic effects of COVID-19. Okay, and next slide. Now, Congress responded way back in the spring with some very, very helpful legislation. But Congress too seems to have assumed that the virus was going to ease up in just a few months, because most of what the US government provided, and that meant unemployment benefits, paid leave, renters protections, and so on, had an end date at the end of the year. By summer, Congress realized that that wasn't going to be enough, and for whatever their reasons are, the members couldn't agree on what to put in place in 2021 until the very end of December, just a few days before millions of American residents would lose their unemployment benefits and their eviction protections that were put in place in the laws that were passed back in the spring. Now, in late December, Congress really did pass a new $900 billion pandemic relief bill, and that dealt with many of the same measures that were provided for in the 2020 bill. It included new direct, and that's a new slide, yeah, next slide. Okay, it provided for $600 payments to most US residents, in fact, continuation of the unemployment benefits in a slightly lesser form until spring. And those are so critical and quite honestly so complicated that Rose is going to explain those to you in a few minutes. And there are also additional state and local unemployment benefits that are also available now. Congress provided for some help for renters. There's a brief extension of the eviction ban that was put in place by the federal government in 2020. There are billions of rental assistance that will eventually go out to state and local governments. I don't know that that money has actually been allocated at all, but it certainly should be in the coming months. And Steve is going to give you the most up-to-date information that we have on those provisions, both federal and state and local protections that are available for renters. And now, and this is, next slide, please. In the last 2 weeks, President Biden has issued a series of executive orders that'll go even further to fortify some of the COVID benefits and protections that Congress and the federal government put in place at the end of last year. And we will update you on all of those important benefits and protections that his administration has put in place as we go along. And also some important new masking mandates that have now come from the federal government that we'll just mention at the very end. I'll also mention that the Biden administration has an ambitious bill with more aid to individuals and states that should ease some of the economic and health burdens of the pandemic. But what happens to that bill right now is anyone's guess. Now, we're going to follow it closely, going to follow what happens to it in Congress closely, and we'll let TASSC members know if and when anything changes. We may end up doing another session like this afterward if a bill does go through and it does provide important additional protections. Next slide, please. Now, one of the important provisions of the December bill that was just passed is the direct payment of $600 a person in 2021 by the IRS. Now, you may remember if you were here in 2020 that there was a $1,200 stimulus payment that was provided for in the legislation that passed back last spring. This time around, Congress passed a $600 per person payment. It goes up to a maximum of $2,400 per family, including children 16 years and younger. And that amount is available to individuals with an annual income of $75,000 or a couple's income of $150,000. It's very, very important that TASSC members appreciate that these payments are available to what the IRS terms resident aliens. And how you figure out who's a resident alien is a complicated little formula, but just please know it will include most TASSC members who have been in the United States since July of 2020. If you've been in the United States since the summer of 2020, you'll most likely qualify for this $600 benefit. And I could also say, with a great likelihood, if you got one of those $1,200 stimulus payments in 2020, you will get one almost automatically in 2021. Also in 2021, payments are going to be available to what the IRS calls mixed status households, where one spouse is a citizen, but the other is not and doesn't have a social security number. That fixes a technical mistake that was made last year. There was no intent to exclude those families, but as a problem in the drafting of the law, that's fixed now. Now, some of you have already gotten your $600 payments, and I'm hoping that later as we get to talk, I'll hear that many of you have. If you have not, go to the IRS website, simple website, irs.gov, to find out if you're scheduled to receive one. You go on irs.gov, you click the Get My Payment icon, and it will tell you whether, as far as the IRS is concerned, you are scheduled to receive a payment and when it is likely to be sent out. If you were eligible and never received your 2020 $1,200 payment, or if you only got a partial payment, it's very important that in your tax return that you file in the next few months, that you file to get that $1,200 payment. And if you don't receive your $600 payment for this year, the new payment, by the time you file your 2020 return, you should also file for that in your 2020 return, the return that you're going to file in the next few months. It's due by April 15th. And when you do that, you should look for what's called a recovery rebate credit on your tax return and claim it when you file that 2020 return. And there's a link to exactly where that is online for more information. And the last thing I'll mention right now is that the bill being proposed by President Biden does include additional stimulus payments. I don't know how that's going to turn out, but we'll be following it closely and we'll let you know when we learn anything. Maryland's governor has also proposed additional stimulus payments for many Maryland residents. And DC is already providing direct payments for some DC residents, depending on their employment status. So at this point, we'll ask Rose to talk about what to expect in 2021 if you're unemployed now or become laid off in the coming months. And she'll also discuss the DC cash payments that I just mentioned.
Thank you, Joanne. Okay, so under the new law, everyone eligible for unemployment benefits, including contract and gig workers, that would be Uber drivers, anyone who's self-employed, who is a contract employee, will receive an extra 11 weeks of benefits until March 14th, 2021. The law also provides a supplement of $300 per week in addition to your regular state insurance and unemployment insurance benefits per week through March 14th. There's an optional program that the feds also added that states can choose to opt into or not. And it seems that, I'll spoil the surprise here, I think Maryland has opted into it, and DC looks like it's going to. Virginia hasn't declared yet. But at any rate, under this optional program, individuals who have not exhausted their 50 weeks of benefit eligibility by the time March 14th comes around will be qualified for an additional, I think it's an additional 4 weeks of benefits through the end of the week of April 5th. So by April 10th, you could claim that. And there's one important change under the new law as far as the PUA goes. That's the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. That's the program that provides unemployment benefits to workers who aren't eligible for regular unemployment insurance. And that changes that those PUA applicants must provide documentation proving their employment or self-employment within 21 days of applying for the benefits. And that begins January 30th. And up until now, they haven't had to provide any kind of documentation. If your benefits have already run out, check your state's website to see what you have to do to receive the extra aid. All 3 local jurisdictions, DC, Maryland, and Virginia, require you to reapply if your benefits were exhausted by December 26th. Most states are reinstating benefits automatically to those who hadn't exhausted their unemployment benefits by the end of 2020, but you may have to wait a few weeks to receive the payments. They're just backed up with their systems. But the good news is that no payments should be missed. So you'll eventually see your money. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. The new law also provides a new category of assistance, this mixed earner unemployment compensation that you see here. That adds a $100 weekly benefit to claimants who are receiving PEUC unemployment benefits. That's people who are qualified for regular unemployment insurance. And they can get this additional benefit if they can prove they received $5,000 in self-employment income in the most recent taxable year. PUA claimants are not eligible for this, and the states can choose whether to participate. And as it notes here, all 3 states will participate in the program, but none of them are set up to do it just yet. So we have to wait another week or 2 or 3 to see what they do with that. If you could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So unemployment benefits in Washington, D.C. DC is now processing their extended unemployment benefit claims for eligible individuals beginning the week ending January 2nd through March 13th. DC seems to still be working things out with the federal government as to how it's going to extend the benefits. And they haven't given any more detail than that, so I'm not sure, what level of detail they're talking about. But in the meantime, they're going to be providing more information on their website. So you should keep an eye on the website to keep updated on that. But we know a few things going into it. The first is that you must file for regular unemployment benefits before applying for the PUA benefit. If you're eligible for regular unemployment, then that's the benefit you will receive. The PUA is only available if you are ineligible for regular unemployment. So keep that in mind. The next slide, please. So while DC is continuing to work things through with the federal government on the details of the benefits and how they'll implement them, there are some important things they want you to know now. And these are listed here. If you filed for PUA benefits before December and your claim was approved, eligible funds for the PUA program will be paid through December 26, 2020. So you can continue to file your weekly unemployment certifications while the agency awaits guidance from the federal government. If your regular, can we go forward to the, we just lost that slide. There you go, thank you. If your regular unemployment benefits were exhausted by December 26th, you must apply for PEUC to receive benefits. They won't kick in automatically, so be sure to reapply. Claimants should continue to file weekly certifications. DC's system is swamped currently. They're trying to update it And it seems like it's kind of a mess at the moment, but it's making it difficult for some claimants to file their claims. But don't give up, keep trying. The missed payments will be paid retroactively, so that's good news too. It just takes a lot of perseverance to get there sometimes. Eligible weeks prior to December 26, 2020 can still be processed if they were applied for by December 26th. This is under the old law. And I don't know if that applies to any of you, but if it does, know that you can still, as long as you've applied for them by December 26th, you can still get that money. All new PUA claims filed after December 26th can only be backdated to December 1st. And new claimants should apply for unemployment compensation online. And the website is provided there. We have the next slide, please, Nafisa. In addition to DC's unemployment, they're also trying to extend benefits through direct stimulus payments. The district is sending one-time direct stimulus payments of $1,200 to DC residents who have an active PUA claim, filed a weekly certification, and were eligible to receive DC PUA benefits for the week ending December 5th, 2020. That means you must have applied by November 30th. No additional application is necessary to receive the stimulus payment. It should be sent to you automatically if you meet those criteria. And if you're looking for more information on that, there's some available on their website. Could I have the next slide, please?
Yeah, and just before we move to the next slide, we're getting a little bit of feedback noise from somebody's microphone. So if everybody wouldn't mind just muting yourself until you have a question, just so it's clear for everybody to hear Rose.
Thanks, Nafisa. Okay. I'm sorry, there we are, that's it. This is additional assistance that's being offered by DC. In addition to the direct stimulus payment, DC Cares is offering financial assistance to residents they have to be DC residents excluded from regular unemployment insurance and PUA, they have to meet both these criteria, informal or cash economy workers that could include day laborers, domestic workers, street vendors, other cash economy workers, construction people who do daily jobs, or undocumented workers or immigrants without employment authorization. It hasn't been stated exactly how much money they're going to be dispersing. I think overall they have, was it 7 million, I think, to work with, but anyway, if you fall into one of these categories, you should definitely apply. And to do that, you'll need a photo ID with your name and date of birth, proof of your DC residency. And they mentioned eligibility documents by category. I think that you're going to have to get in touch with DC Cares and talk about the specifics of your situation to find out exactly what the eligibility documents they would need for you would be. And finally, your updated contact information, which would just be your phone and email contacts so that they can stay in touch with you. You can apply online or by phone, and the phone number and websites are provided there, as well as a place to go for more information about that program. The next slide, please, Nafisa. Thank you. In Maryland, Maryland is accepting claims and issuing payments for up to 11 weeks of benefits with a $300 federal supplement from December 27th, 2020 to March 13th, 2021. And for those who have not exhausted their 50 weeks of benefit eligibility, the benefits may extend through April 10th. So they've chosen to participate in that optional plan that we talked about that the federal government was offering. Eligible claimants will automatically receive $300 for the week ending January 2nd through the week ending March 13th, as long as they file their weekly claim certification. This is very important for all these states. They're all insisting on the weekly claim certification, but no additional application is necessary. Those whose benefits were exhausted before December 26th should reapply for extended benefits. They're not accepting any new PUA or PEUC claims after March 13th, which is the end date of the program. And Maryland will also participate in the new mixed earner unemployment compensation program, but they have not yet set up the parameters of the program. So we'll have to stay tuned for that. There'll be more information coming. Maryland also states on its website that all current claimants will receive a detailed email from the state outlining the next steps for you to take. So that's helpful, I hope. The next slide, please. Virginia is also accepting claims, issuing payments under the same situation as the first two jurisdictions, 11 weeks of benefits with a $300 federal supplement from the week ending January 2nd through March 13th. They have not yet opted into that additional program that would take you through April 10th. So we'll have to see what happens with that. For the moment, they're not doing it. Benefit claimants who did not exhaust their 13 weeks of PEUC or 39 weeks of PUA unemployment benefits by the end of 2020 are allowed to claim the remaining weeks. And they should actually now be receiving their benefits. There should have been no break in service, I believe. For benefit claimants who did exhaust their original allotments of PEUC or PUA benefits, they'll be considered for the additional 11 weeks of benefits, but they must reapply with the state. So the target date, they say the target date for the PUA claims was January 29th. The target date for the PEUC claims is not yet out there. They haven't told us, but they do suggest in both cases that claimants monitor their Gov2Go accounts to see where they stand with that. Virginia will participate in the new mixed earner unemployment compensation program, but again, they haven't worked out the details. So that's to be seen also. That's it for my presentation. I can take questions if anyone has questions now, or we can wait till the end if you prefer. If there are no questions, I'll turn it over to Steve and he'll talk to you about housing and rental assistance, and eviction processes, I think. Oh, I'm sorry. There was one more. I'm so sorry. There was one more slide of mine. I'm so sorry. It's just websites you can go to find out about the availability of benefits in your jurisdiction. It's there for you if you need that. Sorry, Steve, it's all yours.
Thank you, Rose.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone who's turned out this evening. I hope this is informative, and we look forward to any questions that you might have. We are getting a little bit of crosstalk, so if you could just make sure that you've muted your microphone, that will help for everybody. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about protections for renters, this is obviously very important for people that have lost income or lost their jobs or have reduced income and need to be able to keep a roof over their heads and need to avoid becoming homeless. So this has been an important focus of what the federal government has been looking at, and also each of the states or each of the jurisdictions has added some additional protection. So I'm going to go through all of those. This one, the federal eviction moratorium, is probably the most important because it applies whether you live in Maryland, Virginia, or DC. Regardless of where you live, you're protected under this eviction moratorium. And this is based on a directive from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It's a public health issue because they don't want people becoming homeless or having to move in with a lot of other people while the pandemic is underway and the virus can be transmitted so easily. The key part of this moratorium is this written statement that you would have to sign and give to your landlord, the person you pay rent to, even if you're just renting a room in somebody's house, you just give it to the person that you pay rent to. And you have to be, say 5 things in this statement. You have to say that these 5 things are true. First, your income is below $99,000 a year. Second, that you can't pay your full rent because of COVID-related substantial loss of household income. That could be that you've lost your job. It could be that the job that you have has reduced the hours. It could be that even that you've had to leave your job or cut back your hours to take care of children who are out of school, this type of thing. But that's the reason that you can't pay full rent. The third thing is you have to say that you've tried your best to obtain all government assistance that's available. We'll talk about those rental assistance programs. If you have applied for them and haven't been able to obtain any assistance, that's where you would mention this here. Fourth is that you've tried your best to pay as much of your rent as you can. Most people, their income hasn't necessarily gone down to zero. They can pay some rent. And so if you've been able to do that, you're eligible here. And finally, you have to say that if you were evicted, if you were turned out of your apartment or house that you're living in, you'd either become homeless or you'd have to move in with other people in close quarters. And so there's a public health risk there. So these are the 5 things that you need to say. I've got at the bottom of this slide, you see a link to the place where there's the form that you would have to sign, that all these things are true. Let me just say 2 things about this. First, it's very important if you have documentation of any of these facts, it's important to pull that together too. If you lost your job, you got some kind of layoff notice, you have that. If you have applied for government assistance and been told that you're not eligible or been told that the money is run out for that rental assistance, be sure you keep that piece of paper as well. The second thing is that this is a statement under penalty of perjury, so you shouldn't be filing it if these statements are not true. But if they are true, this is probably the most important thing you can do to prevent yourself from being evicted, at least right now. Now, this doesn't stop a landlord from filing an eviction case in court. Eviction is a multi-step process, and one important fact is that you can't be forced to move out unless a court orders that. You can't just be forced to move out because your landlord says, you're not paying me, you have to go. You don't have to go unless and until a court orders that you have to go. So although there are different ways that this moratorium has been interpreted, and in some places, particularly I think in Virginia, there are cases where cases have been filed in court and the court has been prepared to order an eviction, but it's suspended that eviction. They haven't issued that order because of this type of this moratorium. So in other words, this wouldn't necessarily prevent the landlord from taking steps to evict you, but the final eviction order can't be issued. Now, this is an area where President Biden coming in has helped to extend the protections here. He told the Centers for Disease Control, extend this moratorium until March 31st, at least March 31st of this year. It was set to run out on January 31st. And the Centers for Disease Control has done that. They just issued an order last week that said this is in place until at least March 31st. Now, I think Joanne mentioned the legislation that's now pending before Congress. That might extend this moratorium further beyond March 31st. But of course, we don't know what's going to happen with that legislation. When we do, we'll update all this information. But right now, you can go to the TASSC website, and there's a page that's entitled Hold on Evictions Nationwide under the COVID-19 resources section. Hold on Evictions Nationwide. And that has all the details, including the link to this statement that you would have to sign in order to get the benefit of this moratorium. And I also want to say, I think I mentioned this before, this applies even if you don't have a written lease, even if you don't have a formal landlord-tenant relationship, but you're paying somebody to contribute to the rent for their house or their apartment, this applies to you as well. It applies to anybody that has the right to get you out of your living quarters. If you don't pay rent, they can't get an eviction until March 31st at the earliest. So let's move to the next slide, please. Beyond these federal protections, the different jurisdictions have some other rules that would apply. For example, if you're not entitled to the federal moratorium, if all 5 of those statements aren't true, or for some other reason it doesn't apply to you, DC has the strongest protections. Under the laws that have been passed in DC, there just no evictions will be ordered by the courts so long as a state of emergency is in effect. And, we don't know how long that's going to be, but it certainly is going to be a while yet. DC also has passed some laws that say that if landlords aren't getting their full rent, they have to offer you a payment plan. If you're behind in your rent and you owe back rent, most landlords in most situations in DC have to offer a payment plan of up to 12 months for you to pay off that back rent. So DC really has the strongest protections. In Maryland, there won't be any new eviction cases being heard before March 15th in the courts. There are some cases where eviction orders, where the court has already decided that you haven't paid your rent, you're not entitled to stay in your apartment, but they haven't issued an eviction order. There could be some eviction orders issued in those cases that have already been decided, but for the most part, the eviction cases won't be heard. They're on ice, if you will, until March 15th. Now, the governor of Maryland issued an order very early on in the pandemic that suspended evictions in some cases if the tenant can prove that the reason that he or she is not paying the full rent is because of COVID. Again, either you lost your job, you had to leave your job to take care of children who are out of school, you were sick with COVID yourself and you couldn't continue working, so on and so forth. That order has been interpreted by the courts to say, well, if you can prove that these things are true, then your eviction will be suspended. But unlike the federal moratorium where you just have to sign this statement, you might have to go to court and actually prove that you can't pay the rent because of COVID-related reasons. So it's, in that sense, it's not quite as strong as the federal moratorium, but it is important, again, in those cases that the federal moratorium might not apply to. In Virginia, they passed a law in November of 2020 that's actually pretty complicated, but it does allow for a delay in any evictions that might be proceeding through the courts. So basically, it says if the landlord, at least as of for something that's happening this year, the landlord has to give you a notice that says how much you owe. They have to in most cases, if the landlord has more than 5 rental units, they have to offer you a payment plan to pay your back rent. And they also have to tell you that assistance may be available from the state or from the city or the county, and they have to help you apply for state or local assistance or even apply on your behalf. And we'll talk about that in just a minute, about the rental assistance that might be available. So this is there's a number of hoops that if you will, that the landlord has to go through before they can move their eviction case forward for a court order, and that could take up to 60 days. Then when the case goes to court, if you can prove in writing that you can't pay the rent because of COVID-related loss of income, similarly to what's the case in Maryland, then you can get an additional 60 days of delay from the court. Neither of these things prevent the eviction, but they can delay it. It gives you a little more time to try to come up with the back rent, and particularly with a payment plan where you can spread out the rent over a period of time. It may be helpful in keeping you in the house or in the apartment that you're living in. So let's go to the next slide, please. Rental assistance. What I'm talking about here is programs. Usually these programs don't pay money to you, but they pay money to the landlord. They pay it to the person that you owe the rent to. And they prevent you from being evicted because the landlord is getting paid in effect by the government for at least some of the rent that you owe. Now, there are programs in all 3 jurisdictions, but as Joanne said at the beginning, the problem is getting the funding for some of these programs. Many of them ran out of money during 2020. Congress passed a law in the end of 2020 that provides a lot more money for this, but it takes a while for this to filter down from the federal government to the state government or to the local government that may be actually providing the assistance. So this is an area where you have to be, you have to kind of keep on the case to see if rental assistance is becoming available. Now, the information about all of the rental assistance programs in all of these jurisdictions is available on the TASSC website, or your case manager can help you access that information. I would point out in Maryland, the Montgomery and Prince George's counties, there are programs But right now, they're not taking any applications because they don't have any money available to use for this assistance. There is a wait list that you can get on in Montgomery County, and I would certainly encourage people in Montgomery County to do that. Virginia has a statewide program. It's called RMRP, the Rent and Mortgage Relief Program. They are accepting applications. And there also are programs in Arlington County, City of Alexandria, and so forth. And the important thing that I mentioned before is that if you file an application for this type of assistance, that can delay any eviction proceeding from going forward. And under the law that was passed in last November, you have up to 45 days to try to get this assistance. If after 45 days you don't get it, or if they've run out of money, then the eviction can proceed. But just filing an application can stop an eviction from proceeding. And finally, as I mentioned, there is going to be more funding available from the federal government, but we haven't seen it yet at the local level. And in any case, none of these assistance programs are really adequately funded. These are just temporary efforts to try to keep people from being evicted and from becoming homeless. They're not really a long-term solution. I think I've got one more slide here. Thank you. So keeping a roof over your head, staying in your home is extremely important, but it's also important that you be able to live in that home, that you have electricity, that you have gas, if that's the source of your heat, and that you have water service and sewer service. So all of the jurisdictions have addressed this to some extent. Again, the protections are strongest in DC. The service cutoffs are prohibited during the state of emergency and even after the state of emergency for 15 days. It includes not only electricity, gas, and water, but also basic cable service, basic internet service. So you're pretty well protected in DC. And DC Water, which provides the sewer and water service in DC, is providing, they have to offer payment plans if you are behind in your payments on that service, and the other utilities are waiving the late fees. Maryland has much weaker protections right now. They used to have the same kind of prohibition on service cutoffs that DC did, but it expired. So the best that you can say in Maryland is that your water and sewer service won't be cut off. The agency that provides those in Montgomery and Prince George's counties have said they're not going to cut off any service. And then all the utilities are offering payment plans. So again, in the materials that are on the TASSC website, you can find out how to access that information about payment plans. And finally, in Virginia, it's been back and forth a little bit in Virginia, but they are now have pretty strong protections. They are not allowing service cutoffs for electricity, gas, or water during the state of emergency. And the utilities have to offer a payment plan for the money that you owe. Now, there's also financial assistance for paying utilities in all these jurisdictions. And again, the TASSC website or your case manager would be able to link you up with those. The money is limited. There is some new federal funding that's coming. It hasn't arrived yet, but it is definitely worth checking on that. If you're having trouble paying your electricity, gas, or water bill, there are various assistance programs in all of the jurisdictions, DC, Maryland, and Virginia, and you certainly should try to pursue that. So that kind of explains the situation with regard to rental, with regard to utilities, and if there are any questions about that, I'm happy to try to answer those. And if no questions, I'll pass it back to Joanne.
Okay. So just a couple of things that we still want to touch on. For those of you who are working during the pandemic, especially in essential jobs, hospitality, food processing, retail jobs, working in the pandemic has obviously been very challenging. And here's just a couple of things to keep in mind about some of the difficulties we know workers are experiencing. If your hours have been reduced or your weekly or your hourly compensation has been cut, and that's not unfortunately been an uncommon event, you may well be eligible for partial unemployment benefits that will help you fill the gap between you were receiving before the pandemic and what your current compensation is. So by all means, go back to your DC, Maryland, or Virginia unemployment agency and look into that. Also, if you can't work because your child's school or daycare is closed, it may still be possible to get unemployment. That window seems to be closing somewhat, but it may still be possible. Now, back in the spring, Congress passed some very good mandatory paid leave requirements for employees who had to miss work because they had the virus, they were quarantined, they were caring for someone with the virus, or missed work because of school or daycare closures. Unfortunately, those are some of the benefits that ended on December 31st, and they were not put back into the new bill for 2021. Now, I'll add that's part of the bill, apparently, that the Biden administration is proposing now, and we'll watch that and let you know if in the end, a bill is passed and those benefits are restored. But those were quite valuable when they were in effect. I will just want to say about that, if you're a gig worker, a freelancer, self-employed, so if you're getting that PUA unemployment compensation that Rose talked about and had to miss work for any of these COVID-related reasons, you couldn't get paid leave at the time, but you can get a tax credit for that time that you missed work and were not paid when you file your 2020 tax return. So that's something else to look for on your tax return. And if you were eligible, by all means, you should file for that extra compensation through a tax credit. And then lastly, if you believe that you have to work under unsafe conditions because of the virus, you may be eligible for unemployment. Specifically, that includes if you're being exposed to the virus because of carelessness in enforcing good practices by your employer. Now, DC and Virginia, unfortunately not Maryland yet, but DC and Virginia have both adopted special workplace safety standards for protecting workers from undue exposure to the virus. And President Biden just issued an executive order that requires the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration to offer federal COVID safety standards that'll apply across the country. So if you could show that your employer violated either the DC, Virginia requirements or the upcoming federal standards, and those will probably take some time to maybe a couple months to actually be enforceable, you can make a strong case for refusing to go to work and getting unemployment benefits as a result. And also by reporting those violations, get government inspectors to investigate that employer, to impose penalties, and to require them to remedy their deficiencies in protecting workers from COVID. And then one last thing I want to mention, and we don't have a PowerPoint for that because it's still, it's so new that it's still being developed. We've talked about a number of executive orders that have been issued by the president. There are two new important ones that are part of Biden's new, what he's calling the 100 days masking challenge. Now there have been masking requirements and, go into many buildings in the DC area for the last many months, but now we have to take those masking requirements more seriously in a number of different places. The first executive order required masks on federal property. Obviously, that includes federal government buildings. We expect that this is going to extend to federal parkland and other federal land. And so in our area, it could very well apply to the large areas downtown that's around the monuments and the museums that are federal property. And also, we believe it's going to cover post offices. So masks, this is now a federal requirement. His second executive order on masking is even more expansive and will affect more of us because masks are now required on virtually all forms of public transportation. And here we're talking about airplanes, trains, boats, subways, buses, taxis, and probably even ride shares like Uber and Lyft. It also include the facilities for those transportation hubs, airports, train and bus stations, metro stations. Masks are now absolutely required. Now, as I said, local and state governments, airlines, Amtrak, they've had mask requirements in place for some time, but they typically didn't have really any ability to enforce them. And most simply tried to get voluntary compliance, and where they couldn't, it was just, allowed to happen. Folks could go unmasked nonetheless. But now, with these new executive orders, federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies are going to be expected to enforce the orders and remove offenders from the covered federal property or bus station or train station or the whole range of transportation vehicles that I just mentioned. We soon expect civil penalties to be imposed by the federal agencies and state and local governments that are going to be enforcing these orders. So, the Interior Department on federal lands, the Transportation Department with regard to the transportation systems. And also, please keep in mind, refusal to leave a site if you are required by the police, refusal to put on a mask or otherwise have to leave a site by the police, and resisting that could result in arrest and potential criminal penalties. So please do be aware of these requirements. Again, this is something we've been vaguely aware of for a very long time now, but I think we all have to take them much, much more seriously now. If you need a mask, you don't have one, please let your case manager know as soon as possible. As of today, these executive orders are now all effective. And we will do a new fact sheet for the website as soon as we get a few more details about the new orders and how they're going to be enforced. Okay, and the last slide. The details about all that we've talked about, and I know it's been pretty detailed, but these are complicated programs, and how to access them can be complicated, but that's all included on the COVID-19 resource pages that are on the TASSC website. And we will commit to updating those as soon as new legislation is finalized or any state or local government makes amendments to its procedures and policies. And then finally, if you have problems accessing any of these benefits or protections that we talked about, or just have questions about this that you think of later, please contact your case manager. Between them and us, we hope we'll be able to help you get the information that you need and the access to the benefits that you need. So for now, thanks for listening, and please, we'd love to hear any other questions that you might have.